The courtroom was dead silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning in the Southern District of New York. On one side stood Julian Thorne, a man who had just spent 3 hours listing every coffee, every taxi ride, and every piece of toast he had paid for during his 5-year marriage. He was smirking, convinced he was about to leave his ex-wife penniless. On the other side sat Elsa, wearing a faded grey cardigan, looking down at her hands. Julian's lawyer called her a parasite. His mother called her a charity case. They thought they had won. They thought she was broken. But they made one fatal mistake. They forgot to check who really owned the building they were standing in. When Elsa finally spoke, she didn't beg for alimony. She uttered 5 words that cost her ex-husband $300 million. This is the story of the divorce that shook Wall Street. The mahogany doors of courtroom 302 swung open with a heavy thud, signaling the arrival of the Thorne family. They moved like a phalanx of well-dressed sharks. Leading the pack was Julian Thorne, 34 years old, heir to the Thorne Logistics shipping empire, and a man who wore his arrogance like his bespoke Brioni suit, tailored to perfection and suffocatingly expensive. On his arm wasn't his wife. It was Chloe, a 22-year-old influencer, with a heavily curated Instagram feed and a diamond bracelet that looked suspiciously like the one missing from the family safe. Trailing behind them was Beatrice Thorne, Julian's mother. Beatrice was a woman who hadn't smiled since the Reagan administration. She clutched her Hermes Birkin bag as if it contained the nuclear codes, her eyes scanning the room for any speck of dust or mediocrity she could sneer at. And then there was Elsa. She was already seated at the defendant's table. In the glitz of the high-stakes divorce court, where billing hours ran into the thousands, Elsa looked like a smudge on a pristine photo. She wore a simple, charcoal grey sweater that looked like it had been washed a few too many times, and her hair was pulled back in a severe, practical bun. She wore no jewelry, no makeup. She looked tired. "Look at her," Julian whispered to Chloe, loud enough for half the room to hear. "She looks like she's applying for a librarian job, not a divorce settlement." Chloe giggled, a sharp, tinkling sound. "Maybe she can use the alimony to buy some concealer." Beatrice leaned in, her voice a low hiss. "Ensure Sterling destroys her, Julian. I want her walking out of here with nothing but the clothes on her back. And even those belong to the Goodwill bin." Marcus Sterling, the Thorne family's attorney, adjusted his cufflinks. Sterling was known in New York legal circles as the Butcher of Park Avenue. He didn't just win cases, he eviscerated the opposition. He charged $1,500 an hour and considered it a discount. He glanced at the opposing table. Elsa sat alone, except for an elderly man shuffling papers next to her. This was Arthur Penhooligan. If Sterling was a shark, Arthur looked like a tortoise that had lost its shell. He was wearing a suit that was at least 2 decades out of fashion, slightly oversized, with a mustard stain on the lapel. He was rummaging through a canvas tote bag instead of a leather briefcase. "Is that her lawyer?" Sterling scoffed, leaning toward Julian. "Arthur Penhooligan. I thought he died 10 years ago. He used to do estate wills for grandmothers in Queens. This is going to be a bloodbath." The bailiff called, "All rise." Judge Harrison entered. He was a no-nonsense man who had presided over the messy divorces of rock stars and hedge fund managers. He looked at the docket and sighed. "Thorne v. Thorne. Another rich kid dumping the starter wife. He wanted this over by lunch." "Be seated," Judge Harrison grumbled. "Mr. Sterling, you are the petitioner. Let's get on with it. What is the contention?" Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. He walked to the center of the room, commanding the space. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice smooth as velvet. "We are here today to dissolve the marriage between Mr. Julian Thorne and Mrs. Elsa Thorne. However, the contention lies in the financial demands. We anticipate that Mrs. However, the contention lies in the financial demands. We anticipate that Mrs. Thorne will attempt to claim a significant portion of the Thorne family assets. Assets she had absolutely no hand in creating, maintaining, or understanding." Sterling paced back and forth, gesturing at Elsa. "For 5 years, Your Honor, my client has been the sole provider. He has paid the mortgage, the bills, the vacations, and the credit cards. Mrs. Thorne has not held a job since the day they married. She has contributed 0 income to the household. She spends her days. Well, we aren't quite sure what she does. Gardening, reading, spending my client's hard-earned money." Julian leaned back in his chair, smirking at Elsa. He remembered how he found her 5 years ago, a quiet girl in a coffee shop in Seattle. He liked that she was passive. He liked that she didn't ask questions. She was the perfect blank canvas for him to project his ego onto. But then she got boring. She didn't like the parties. She didn't like the press. And then he met Chloe, who loved the cameras as much as he did. "We are petitioning," Sterling continued, "for the enforcement of the prenuptial agreement signed 5 years ago. It states clearly what is brought into the marriage remains separate. What is earned during the marriage is separate property unless commingled. Mr. Thorne has kept his finances strictly separate. Therefore, Mrs. Thorne is entitled to nothing beyond a standard severance." "A severance?" Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. "She's a wife, Mr. Sterling, not a laid-off factory worker. In terms of economic value, Your Honor, the distinction is negligible," Sterling said coldly. The courtroom gasped. Even the stenographer paused. It was a brutal, dehumanizing insult. Beatrice Thorne nodded approvingly from the gallery. Elsa didn't flinch. She just continued to stare at the wooden table, her face unreadable. Her old lawyer, Arthur, was busy cleaning his glasses with a handkerchief, seemingly oblivious to the insults being hurled at his client. "Very well," the judge said, looking at Arthur. Mr. Penhaligon, does the defense wish to make an opening statement? Arthur fumbled with his glasses, put them on crookedly, and stood up. He looked confused. Oh, is it my turn? Yes. Thank you, Your Honor. He cleared his throat. It sounded like a rusty engine. My client, Arthur said, his voice trembling slightly, is not asking for any of Mr. Thorne's money. Julian's head snapped up. Beatrice frowned. Excuse me, the judge asked. She doesn't want it, Arthur repeated. She is happy to sign the divorce papers. She just wants to ensure that the separation of assets is mutual. That the prenuptial agreement Mr. Sterling loves so much is enforced to the letter. Sterling laughed. A short bark of a laugh. Mutual. Your Honor, Mrs. Thorne has no assets. Unless she wants to split her collection of used paperbacks, there is nothing to be mutual about. We shall see, Arthur mumbled, sitting back down. Julian whispered to Sterling. What is the old fool doing? He's trying to save face, Sterling whispered back. He knows they have no leverage, so he's playing the dignified exit card. Let him. It saves us money. But they didn't see Elsa's hand under the table. She was holding a pen, a Montblanc limited edition skeleton pen, worth about $80,000. She twirled it effortlessly between her fingers, a small, hidden tick of nervousness. Or perhaps anticipation. The morning session was a parade of humiliation. Sterling called Julian to the stand to testify about Elsa's laziness. She slept in until 9 a.m., Julian lied smoothly. I would already be at the office, closing deals, managing the logistics of international shipping. I'd come home and the house would be a mess. She claimed she was working on projects in her home office, but I never saw a dime from it. Did you ever ask her what she was working on? Sterling asked. I didn't bother, Julian scoffed. Probably scrapbooking or writing a diary. It certainly wasn't anything that contributed to our lifestyle. Elsa watched him. She remembered those days differently. She remembered waking up at 4 a.m. to trade Asian markets. She remembered managing the server architecture for her company, Nexus, from the laptop in her sewing room. She remembered Julian barging in, telling her to stop playing on the computer and make him a drink. She had done it. She had closed the laptop, smiled, and made the drink. Because back then, she loved him. Or thought she did. Now, looking at him lying, under oath, that love had turned into something cold and hard. Sterling then called Beatrice Thorne to the stand. My son is a saint, Beatrice declared, clutching her pearls. He married beneath him. We tried to welcome Elsa, but she was unpolished. She didn't understand our world. She refused to attend the galas. She refused to wear the clothes I bought her. She was an embarrassment. And did she ever ask for money? Constantly, Beatrice lied. Always asking for more grocery money. More money for supplies. A leech. When the testimony concluded, it was time for the settlement offer. Sterling walked over to the defense table and dropped a thin folder in front of Arthur. "Here is our final offer," Sterling announced for the court to hear. "Mr. Thorne is generous. He is willing to provide Mrs. Thorne with a one-time payment of $50,000. This is to help her find an apartment and perhaps some vocational training. In exchange, she waives all rights to the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, and the Thorne Logistics shares. $50,000. In New York City. It was an insult. It wouldn't cover rent for a year in a decent borough." Julian smirked at Elsa. "Take it, Elle. It's more money than you've ever seen in your life." Elsa finally looked up. Her eyes were striking, a piercing green that usually looked soft, but now looked like emeralds cut under high pressure. She leaned over to Arthur and whispered something. Arthur nodded slowly. He stood up, holding the folder with two fingers as if it were a dirty tissue. "Your Honor," Arthur said, "my client finds this offer amusing." "Amusing," Sterling snapped. "This is charity, old man. If you go to trial, she gets $0. "We are ready for trial," Arthur said, his voice suddenly losing its tremor. He straightened his back. The confused, senile act seemed to evaporate for a split second. "But before we proceed, we must address the asset declaration." "We have already declared our assets," Sterling shouted. "Mr. Thorne's net worth is valued at $42 million. It's all in the binder." "Yes," Arthur said, opening his canvas tote bag and pulling out a thick, leather-bound document. "We have Mr. Thorne's declaration. But according to the prenuptial agreement, specifically Clause 14b, both parties must provide a full, audited disclosure of all global assets, distinct and commingled, prior to final judgment." "So," Sterling rolled his eyes, "does Mrs. Thorne have a secret savings account with $100 in it? By all means, declare it." Arthur smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a trap snapping shut. "Not exactly a savings account," Arthur said. He walked to the bench and handed a thick document to the judge, then dropped a copy on Sterling's table. The thud was heavy. "This is Mrs. Thorne's asset declaration. Updated as of this morning's market opening." Sterling picked it up casually. He flipped the first page. He froze. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. He flipped to the second page. His face, usually a flushed, healthy pink, went pale. "Is there a problem, Mr. Sterling?" Judge Harrison asked, flipping through his own copy. The judge's eyebrows shot up into his hairline. He looked over his glasses at the woman in the gray cardigan. This is a mistake," Sterling stammered. "This is a typo." I assure you, Mr. Sterling, Arthur said, his voice crisp and sharp. The accountants at Deloitte do not make typos of that magnitude. Julian, sensing the shift in the room, grabbed the document from his lawyer's hands. What is it? What did she put down? Julian demanded. He looked at the bottom line of the first page. Total assets under direct ownership of Elsa v. Thorne. Julian stopped breathing. He stared at the number. He counted the commas. 1 comma. 2 commas. 3 commas. $14,200,000,000. 14 billion dollars. What is this? Julian screamed, his voice cracking. Is this a joke? 14 billion. Thorne, Arthur said calmly. Julian's eyes frantically scanned the list. Owner and founder, Nexus Systems. Majority shareholder, Cobalt AI. Real estate holdings, 40% of the meatpacking district. Intellectual property, the Vance algorithm for high-frequency trading. Nexus Systems, Julian whispered. Other. The cloud computing company. Nexus Systems was the biggest tech unicorn of the decade. It provided the back-end infrastructure for half the banks in the world. Its founder had always been a mystery, known only by the pseudonym EV in the press. AV, Julian muttered. Elsa. Vance. Her maiden name. The courtroom was so silent you could hear a pin drop. The charity case in the grey cardigan wasn't just rich. She was arguably the wealthiest woman in New York City. She could buy the Thorne Logistics Company, burn it to the ground, and not even notice the dip in her bank account. Chloe, the mistress, slowly pulled her hand away from Julian's arm, as if he was suddenly contagious. Sterling looked like he was about to vomit. He looked at the prenup he had been waving around. The prenup that said, what is earned during the marriage is separate property. He had insisted on that clause to protect Julian's $2 million annual salary. In doing so, he had just protected Elsa's $14 billion empire from Julian. Wait, Julian said, his mind racing. Greed began to replace shock. A desperate, hungry look entered his eyes. Wait a minute. We are married. We are married. That's marital property. I'm entitled to half. New York is an equitable distribution state. He looked at the judge, a manic grin spreading across his face. She hid this. She defrauded me. I want half. No, I want spousal support. I'm accustomed to a lifestyle. Well, I could be accustomed to a lifestyle. Elsa finally spoke. She stood up. She didn't look down anymore. She looked at Julian with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. You really didn't read the contract you forced me to sign, did you, Julian? Her voice was low, melodic, and terrifyingly calm. Mr. Penhooligan, she said to her lawyer, please explain clause 4 to my husband. The air in the courtroom had shifted from bored administrative procedure to the electric tension of a bomb disposal unit. Reporters in the back, who had been dozing off, were now frantically typing on their phones. Secret billionaire in court 302. Arthur Penhaligon adjusted his spectacles. He looked less like a confused grandfather now and more like a grandmaster who had just moved his queen. Clause 4, Arthur read from the document Julian had signed 5 years ago with a smug grin. Subsection C, any and all intellectual property, business ventures, or equity created, founded, or conceptualized by either party, regardless of the date of incorporation, shall remain the sole and exclusive property of the creator, provided that the spouse has made no substantial contribution to said business. Arthur looked up over the rim of the paper. Substantial contribution is defined in this agreement, an agreement you drafted, Mr. Sterling, as direct financial investment exceeding $100,000 or documented labor exceeding 20 hours per week. Julian's face turned purple. According to Thorne v. State of New York, domestic support does not constitute a business contribution. You paid for groceries, Mr. Thorne. You did not pay for the server farms in Iceland. You did not write the code for the Nexus neural link. But I'm her husband. Julian slammed his fist on the table. I inspired her. I gave her the stability to work. Actually, Elsa said, stepping out from behind the table. She walked toward the center of the room. She moved differently now. The slouch was gone. She stood with the posture of a CEO who commanded thousands of employees. Actually, Julian, Elsa said, you were my greatest motivation, but not in the way you think. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, 5 years ago, I had just sold my first startup. It was small, a few million. I met Julian. I thought he loved me. But 3 months into the marriage, I heard him talking to his mother. She looked at Beatrice, who was now shrinking into her fur coat, looking terrified. He told her, she's boring, but she's manageable. I'll keep her around until something better comes along. At least she's cheap. The courtroom murmured. That night, Elsa continued, I started coding Nexus. Every time you mocked me, I wrote a better algorithm. Every time you told me I was useless, I secured another patent. Every time you went out with your mistresses, yes, Chloe wasn't the first, I expanded into Asian markets. My success isn't because of you, Julian. It's in spite of you. You wanted a separate life. You wanted to make sure I couldn't touch your shipping money. You got your wish. This is entrapment, Sterling yelled, though he knew legally he was drowning. She failed to disclose assets during the marriage. She was under no legal obligation to disclose the value of private equity until a divorce filing initiated the discovery phase. Arthur countered instantly. And since you insisted on a total separation of assets regime, she kept her business separate. As ordered. Julian looked at the $14 billion figure again. He looked at Chloe. Chloe was looking at her phone, probably deleting her photos with Julian. I won't sign, Julian hissed. I won't finalize the divorce. I'll drag this out for years. I'll sue you for fraud. I'll tie your billions up in court until you rot. Elsa smiled. It was a cold, dangerous smile. I expected you to say that, Julian. That's why I have one more document to show you. She nodded to Arthur. Arthur pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a legal document. It was a printout of an email. Exhibit C, Arthur announced. An email correspondence between Mr. Julian Thorne and Mr. Silas Vane regarding the project Ouroboros shipping contract. Julian's blood ran cold. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. Where did you get that? He whispered. Project Ouroboros, Elsa explained to the judge, is a massive, illegal smuggling operation moving counterfeit electronics through Thorne logistics ports. Julian has been authorizing these shipments for 2 years to cover the company's debts. He thought he was emailing a corrupt contact in Hong Kong named Silas Vane. Elsa took a step closer to Julian. Silas Vane is an alias. It's an AI bot I wrote to track corruption in supply chains. You've been emailing me, Julian, for 2 years. I have every invoice, every bribe, every illegal authorization. Sterling dropped his head into his hands. Oh my God. So, Elsa said, her voice light and conversational. Here are your options. Option A, you continue to fight for my money. I hand this email thread to the FBI, you go to federal prison for 20 years, and Thorne Logistics is seized by the government. She paused. Option B, you sign the divorce papers. You get nothing. No alimony. No settlement. You walk out of here and you never speak my name again. If you do, I release the emails. She looked at the judge. I believe that concludes our negotiation. Julian looked at his mother. Beatrice was weeping silently, not for her son, but for the scandal. He looked at Sterling, who was packing his briefcase, refusing to make eye contact. He looked at Chloe, but she was already gone. She had slipped out the back door moments ago. Julian Thorne, the man who wanted to leave his wife with nothing, realized he was the one holding an empty bag. He picked up the pen, a cheap plastic Bic pen provided by the court. His hand shook violently. I'll sign, he whispered. The heavy oak doors of the courthouse swung open, and the humid New York air rushed in. For Julian Thorne, it felt like stepping into an oven. He was sweating, his shirt collar damp, his hands still cramping from clutching the pen that signed away his future. He expected a few photographers, the usual vulture paparazzi that Beatrice tipped off to ensure the Thorne name stayed in page 6. He didn't expect the roar. It sounded like a stadium. As Julian and Sterling stepped out, a wall of flashbulbs blinded them. Dozens of reporters were shouting, but they weren't shouting for him. Elsa! Elsa! Over here! Ms. Vance! Ms. Vance, is it true about the acquisition? Elsa, look this way. Are you taking Nexus public? Julian blinked, shielding his eyes. What the hell is this? He muttered to Sterling. Why are they here for her? Then he saw it. Parked right at the curb, in the strictly no-standing zone, wasn't a town car. It was a matte black Koenigsegg Jesko, a hypercar worth $3 million. Leaning against it, looking bored, was a bodyguard who looked like he ate concrete for breakfast. Elsa stepped out behind Julian. She had shed the grey cardigan. Underneath, she was wearing a sleeveless black jumpsuit that screamed quiet luxury. Vance, a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, pushed to the front. Sources say you just finalized the divorce. Does this mean the merger with Cobalt AI is proceeding? Elsa paused. She turned to the reporter, ignoring Julian completely. The anchor was weighing down the ship, she said, her voice crisp and clear for the microphones. Now that the anchor is cut. Yes. We fly. The reporters went wild. Julian stood there, frozen. The anchor. She called him an anchor. Mr. Thorne. Mr. Thorne. Did you know your wife was the ghost of Silicon Valley? How does it feel to fumble the bag of the century? No comment, Sterling barked, shoving the microphone away and dragging Julian toward a waiting Uber. Their usual driver hadn't shown up. As Julian wrestled with the door of a Toyota Camry, he looked back. Elsa was slipping into the passenger seat of the Koenigsegg. The bodyguard closed the door. The engine roared, a sound like a jet taking off, and the car peeled away, followed by a cavalcade of press motorcycles. Julian sat in the back of the Uber, the smell of stale pine air freshener filling his nose. He pulled out his phone. His notifications were broken. Twitter trending. 1. Elsa Vance. 2. The billionaire wife. 3. Thorne logistics scandal. 4. Fumbled the bag. He clicked on a link. It was a Forbes article published 3 minutes ago. The headline, Unmasked, the Secret Tycoon. Hello. Elsa Vance built a $14 billion empire from her husband's guest room. The article detailed everything. How she used a network of shell companies to hide her identity because the tech world was biased against women. How she traded under the handle EV. How she donated millions anonymously to charities that Julian's mother publicly mocked. Julian felt bile rise in his throat. He dialed Chloe. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. He threw the phone at the seat in front of him. The driver glared in the rearview mirror. Hey, watch the leather, buddy. Julian Thorne, the Prince of Park Avenue, sank back into the seat. He was beginning to realize that the courtroom was just the mercy kill. The real torture was about to begin. 1 month later, New York society runs on a calendar of exclusion. And the most exclusive date of all was the first Monday of May, the Metropolitan Museum of Art Costume Institute Gala. The Met Gala. For 30 years, Beatrice Thorne had held court at Table 4. It was prime real estate, right next to the Vogue editors and the Hollywood royalty. Beatrice spent the entire month of April terrorizing her stylists and ensuring that everyone knew she was the matriarch of Manhattan. This year, however, the invitations had been delayed. "It must be a clerical error," Beatrice snapped at her assistant, pacing her Upper East Side penthouse. "Call Anna's office again." "I did, Mrs. Thorne," the assistant whispered, looking at the floor. "They said the seating chart is finalized. They said there's no space." "No space. I am Beatrice Thorne." She threw a crystal vase across the room. It shattered against the fireplace. "Julian, fix this. Call the board." Julian was sitting on the sofa, nursing a scotch. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. "The board isn't taking my calls, Mother. The stock is down 60% since the investigation started. We're toxic." "I am not toxic," Beatrice screamed. "I am the victim. That wretched girl tricked us." Suddenly, the TV in the corner caught their attention. It was live from the red carpet. "And here comes the showstopper of the evening," the commentator announced breathlessly. Making her first public appearance since the divorce of the decade. Elsa Vance. It was a technological marvel, shifting colors as she moved. Walking beside her wasn't a date. It was the CEO of LVMH, Louis Vuitton, and the governor of New York. They were laughing at something she said. "And she looks magnificent," the commentator gushed. "And rumor has it she bought Table 4. Beatrice gasped, clutching her chest. "My table. She bought my table." "Apparently," the commentator continued, "Ms. Vance purchased 3 tables this. Vance purchased 3 tables this year. 1 for herself and 2 for the young women in tech scholarship recipients she's sponsoring. A true philanthropist." The camera zoomed in. A reporter shouted, "Elsa, any words for the Thornes tonight?" Elsa stopped. She looked directly into the camera lens. For a second, Julian felt like she was looking right into his living room. "I wish them well," Elsa said, her voice dripping with indifference. "I hear the Hamptons are lovely this time of year. They should visit. It's quiet." It was a dismissal. She wasn't angry. She was over it. Inside the gala, the scene was even more brutal for the Thorne legacy. Sloane Kensington, Julian's childhood friend and one of the mean girls who used to spill wine on Elsa's dresses, accidentally tried to approach Elsa near the Temple of Dendua. "Elsa, darling," Sloane cooed, waving a manicured hand. "I've been trying to text you. My phone has been acting so weird. We must get brunch. I always said you were the smart one." Elsa turned slowly, sipping her champagne. The conversation around her, involving a famous film director and a tech mogul stopped. Elsa looked Sloane up and down. "I'm sorry," Elsa said politely. "Do I know you?" Sloane's smile faltered. It's Sloane. We went to Cabo for Julian's 30th. I sat next to you at the Christmas party." Elsa frowned, pretending to think. "I don't recall. I was usually seated with the staff or in the kitchen during those events. Perhaps you mistook me for the caterer." The tech mogul chuckled. "No, Sloane stammered, turning red. "If you'll excuse me," Elsa said, turning her back. "I'm discussing the acquisition of a satellite network. Enjoy the buffet, Sloane." The circle closed around Elsa again, shutting Sloane out. The message was clear to all of New York high society. If you were mean to Elsa when she was Mrs. Thorne, you don't exist to Elsa Vance. 3 months post-divorce. The headquarters of Thorne Logistics, a glass and steel monolith in Lower Manhattan, usually hummed with the quiet, confident energy of old money. Today, it smelled of panic. On the trading floor, the screens were a sea of red. The ticker symbol THRN was plummeting like a stone dropped into the Hudson. Phones were ringing off the hook, angry creditors, terrified investors, and federal regulators, but nobody was answering them. The receptionists had already walked out. Up on the 45th floor, inside the executive boardroom, the air conditioning was blasting, but Julian Thorne was sweating through his shirt. He stood at the window, looking down at the protesters gathered on the street below. They were holding signs, "Thorne equals fraud and pay your debts." "They're like vultures," Julian muttered, running a hand through his unwashed hair. He hadn't slept in 48 hours. His eyes were rimmed with red, and the stubble on his jaw was gray. "Don't they know who I am?" "They know exactly who you are, Julian," a sharp voice cut through the room. "That's the problem." Beatrice Thorne sat at the far end of the long mahogany table. She was trying to maintain her composure, wearing a Chanel suit and clutching a string of pearls, but her hands were trembling. She looked smaller than she used to, as if the scandal had physically eroded her. "The brand is resilient," Beatrice insisted, her voice shrill. "My grandfather built this company during the Depression. We survived the war. We survived the crash of 08. We will not be taken down by a misunderstanding involving shipping containers." "It's not a misunderstanding, Mother." Julian spun around, his voice cracking. "It's a federal indictment. The banks have frozen the credit lines. The suppliers in Rotterdam are holding our ships hostage until we pay in cash. Cash we don't have." The heavy oak doors creaked open. The CFO, Marcus Gentry, walked in. He looked like a man marching to the gallows. He was carrying a stack of files, and he didn't even look at Julian. He just slumped into his chair. "Well," Julian demanded, "did you speak to Goldman? Are they giving us the bridge loan?" Gentry laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Goldman. Julian Goldman won't even return my emails. I just got off the phone with our legal team in the Caymans. They're resigning. Cowards. Beatrice slammed her hand on the table. Fire them all. We'll hire better lawyers. We need to file for Chapter 11 protection immediately. No. Julian roared. If we declare bankruptcy, I lose the Hamptons estate. I lose the jet. I am not filing. Then we need a buyer, Gentry said, rubbing his temples. We need a white knight. Someone stupid enough or rich enough to absorb the debt and recapitalize the fleet. I've been trying, Julian admitted, his shoulders slumping. I called BlackRock. I called the Saudis. Nobody wants to touch us. We're radioactive. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed. They say they're the new owners. Julian and Beatrice exchanged a confused look. Owners? Julian whispered. What is she talking about? Before he could answer, the double doors of the boardroom were pushed open with force. Walking in first wasn't a security guard, but Arthur Penhaligon. The old lawyer looked nothing like the disheveled man from the divorce court. He was wearing a bespoke midnight blue suit that cost more than Julian's car. He walked with a bounce in his step, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. Behind him came 4 men in dark suits, corporate auditors. They immediately moved to the walls, standing like sentinels. Mr. Penhaligon, Julian sneered, trying to muster some authority. You have no business here. Security will be escorting you out. Actually, Arthur said, his voice calm and melodic, security has already been informed of the change in management. They work for us now. Us? Beatrice stood up, her pearls rattling. Who is us? You represent that pauper girl. Arthur smiled. He placed his briefcase on the table and clicked the latches open. The sound echoed like a gunshot. For the past 3 months, Arthur explained, sliding a thick document down the table toward Gentry, Thorne Logistics stock has been in freefall. You were so busy fighting the DOJ that you didn't notice the accumulation of shares by a holding company called Nemesis Ventures. Gentry picked up the document. His eyes widened behind his glasses. He flipped the pages frantically. Nemesis Ventures. Gentry muttered. They bought the dip. Every time the price crashed, they bought. They bought the institutional dumps. They bought the retail panic sells. Gentry looked up, his face pale. Julian. They own 51% of the voting stock. As of this morning's bell. That's impossible. Julian lunged for the papers. That would cost billions. Elsa doesn't have that kind of liquidity. She's a tech CEO, not a corporate raider. She is whatever she needs to be, a voice said from the doorway. The room went dead silent. Elsa Vance stood in the entrance. She looked unrecognizable, from the woman Julian had married. Gone was the messy bun, the grey cardigan, the apologetic posture. She wore a white architectural suit, sharp shoulders, tailored waist, pristine fabric that seemed to repel the grime of the city. Her hair was a sleek, glossy bob. She wore no jewelry except for a small pin on her lapel, the logo of Nexus Systems. She didn't storm in. She didn't shout. She simply walked into the room with the casual, terrifying confidence of someone who owns the oxygen everyone else is breathing. She walked past Gentry. She walked past Beatrice. She stopped at the head of the table. Julian was standing in front of the chairman's chair. His chair. Elsa stopped inches from him. She looked him up and down, her expression devoid of hate. It was something worse, pity. "Hello, Julian," she said softly. "Elsa," Julian choked out. He tried to puff out his chest to intimidate her, but he felt shrinking. "Are you? You can't just walk in here. This is my company. My name is on the building." "Actually, the sign painters are in the lobby right now," Elsa said, checking her watch. "It should be down by noon." She nodded at the chair behind him. "You're in my seat." The board members, Gentry, the VP of Operations, the legal counsel, all looked down at their notebooks. None of them dared to make eye contact with Julian. They knew where the power lay now. They knew who signed the checks. "I won't move," Julian hissed, gripping the leather backrest. "I am the CEO." Motion to remove Julian Thorne as CEO for cause, effective immediately, Arthur Penhaligon said loudly to the room. "Seconded," Gentry said instantly, raising his hand. "Seconded," the VP of Operations added. "Motion carried," Arthur said. "Mr. Thorne, you are trespassing." Julian looked at Gentry, betrayed. "Marcus, after everything I did for you." "You almost sent me to prison, Julian," Gentry said coldly. "Move." Trembling with rage and humiliation, Julian released his grip on the chair. He stepped aside. Elsa sat down. She didn't sink into the chair, she commanded it. She placed her hands on the table, interlaced her fingers, and looked around the room. "Let's get to work," she said, her voice changing from personal to professional in a nanosecond. "First order of business, liquidation of the legacy assets." "Liquidation," Beatrice screeched. "You're selling the ships." "I'm selling the smuggling vessels," Elsa corrected, not even looking at Beatrice. "We are dissolving the Thorne Logistics brand. The assets will be absorbed into a new subsidiary, Vance Global Solutions." She pressed a button on the table's control panel. A holographic projection appeared in the center of the table. It showed a map of the world, with shipping routes glowing in green. "We are pivoting," Elsa announced to the stunned board. "No more fossil fuels. No more dark money. We are retrofitting the fleet for hydrogen-electric propulsion. We will be the first carbon-neutral shipping giant in the Atlantic. I've already secured contracts with Tesla and Amazon. They were waiting for new management. The board members were stunned. Gentry looked at the projections. This is brilliant. The tax credits alone would wipe out the debt in 2 years. Exactly, Elsa said. Julian stood by the wall, watching his wife, his ex-wife, do in 5 minutes what he couldn't do in 5 years. She was dazzling. She was a titan. And he had treated her like a servant. You stole this from me, Julian whispered. You stole my legacy. Elsa stopped. She slowly turned her head to look at him. Julian, she said, her voice dropping an octave. Do you remember the Hong Kong problems? Julian froze. I don't know what you mean. The email you sent to Sealer's Vein regarding the shipment of counterfeit GPUs. She elaborated. The one that the FBI has. Yes. Julian swallowed hard. You used the shipping code HK409, Elsa said. That code routes to the port of Shenzhen, not Hong Kong. If the shipment had gone there, the Chinese authorities would have seized it and executed your contacts. She leaned forward. I went into the backend server that night. I changed the code to HK888. I rerouted the ship. I saved your life, Julian. And I saved this company from an international incident. I didn't steal your legacy. I was the only one keeping it alive. The realization hit Julian like a physical blow. She had been protecting him even while he was cheating on her. Even while he was mocking her. Why, he whispered. Why did you help me? Because unlike you, Elsa said, I took my vows seriously. For better or for worse. But then, you broke the contract. She pointed to the door. Security, please remove the unauthorized personnel. And Beatrice, take your portrait from the lobby on your way out. It scares the interns. 2 large security guards stepped forward. One took Julian by the arm. The other gestured to Beatrice. Get your hands off me, Beatrice shrieked as she was guided out, clutching her Chanel bag like a shield. Julian didn't fight. He let the guard lead him to the door. At the threshold, he looked back. Elsa was already deep in conversation with Gentry, pointing at the hologram, discussing hydrogen fuel cells. She didn't look back. She didn't watch him leave. He was already a ghost to her. The heavy doors slammed shut, leaving Julian Thorne in the hallway, surrounded by the silence of a future he would never be a part of. 1 year later, New York City was draped in the golden, melancholic light of late October. In Central Park, the trees were shedding their leaves in a slow-motion rain of copper and amber. It was the kind of day that felt like an ending, or perhaps a quiet beginning. Elsa Vance sat on her usual bench near the Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis Reservoir. She wasn't surrounded by a phalanx of security today, nor was she draped in the liquid gold of a gala gown. She wore a simple cashmere sweater, dark jeans, and leather boots. A paperback book lay open on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. She was simply watching the joggers pass by, her mind finally, for the first time in a decade, at peace. She felt a shadow stretch across the pavement in front of her. It didn't have the sharp, aggressive silhouette of a predator. It felt heavy, weary. Elsa didn't look up immediately. She knew the gait. She knew the scent of the cologne, now replaced by the faint, sharp smell of industrial detergent and cheap tobacco. "I heard you come here on Tuesdays," the voice said. Elsa finally lifted her head. Julian Thorne stood before her, but the Prince of Park Avenue was gone. He had lost weight, his face hollowing out in a way that made him look a decade older. He was wearing a generic navy blue utility jacket with a small tear on the shoulder. His hair, once styled by the most expensive barbers in Manhattan, was cropped short and uneven. "Hello, Julian," Elsa said. Her voice wasn't cold, it was worse. It was neutral. Julian shifted his weight, looking at the empty space on the bench. "Can I sit?" "No," Elsa said firmly. "I'd like to keep this space for myself." Julian nodded quickly, a flash of the old shame crossing his features. "Right. Of course. I just wanted to see you before I go." "The plea deal," Elsa said. It wasn't a question. She knew everything that happened in the legal system regarding the Thorne case. The judge was lenient. 5 years, Julian said, looking out at the water. "Minimum security. I start on Monday." My lawyer, the one provided by the state, since Sterling dropped me the second the retainers dried up, said I should be grateful. Apparently, someone behind the scenes suggested that I wasn't the mastermind, just an incompetent participant. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "Was that you, Elle? Did you save me again?" Elsa closed her book. "I didn't do it for you, Julian. I did it for the truth. You weren't a mastermind. You were a man desperate to please a mother who never loved you, and a man too weak to admit he was failing. That's not a crime that deserves a life sentence. It just deserves a consequence." Julian let out a ragged breath. He looked down at his hands, the hands that used to hold champagne flutes and the keys to Italian sports cars. They were calloused now. "I have nothing," he whispered. "The bank took the penthouse. The Hamptons house was seized by the DOJ. Mother is. She's in a state-run facility. She doesn't recognize me anymore. She just keeps asking why the servants are late with her tea." He looked back at Elsa, a desperate, hungry look entering his eyes. "I just keep asking myself, why did you stay? If you were a billionaire the whole time, if you had all this power, why did you let me treat you like that? Why did you make me dinner? Why did you stay in that guest room while I was out with with people who didn't matter. Elsa stood up. She was shorter than him, but she seemed to tower over him in the quiet of the park. Because I loved the version of you I thought existed, she said softly. I saw a man who was burdened by a legacy he didn't want. I thought if I took the pressure off, if I handled the house, the emotions, the small things, the real Julian would surface. I thought my love could be a sanctuary for you. She took a step closer, her green eyes piercing. But then I realized, Julian, there was no other version of you. But then I realized, Julian, there was no other version of you. The cruelty wasn't a mask. The arrogance wasn't a defense mechanism. It was just you. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a witness to your greatness. And when you realized I was more than a witness, you hated me for it. Julian flinched as if the words were physical blows. I loved you, he croaked. In my own way. No, Elsa said, her voice echoing with finality. You loved the convenience of me. The person. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, white envelope. She handed it to him. What's this? A check. Julian asked, hope flickering in his eyes for a fraction of a second. It's a bus ticket, Elsa said. To the facility where your mother is. And a small account in your name, just enough for a modest apartment and a car when you get out in 5 years. It's not a fortune. It's a chance. Julian took the envelope. His hand shook. Why are you doing this after everything I did? Because I'm not you, Elsa said. Elsa, wait. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The apology hung in the air, but it had nowhere to land. Elsa didn't look back. She walked toward the edge of the park, where a simple black SUV was waiting, not to whisk her away to a throne, but to take her to her next board meeting where she would build something that actually mattered. Julian stood alone on the path. He pulled a crumpled Polaroid from his pocket, a photo from their honeymoon in Italy. In the photo, Elsa was laughing, looking at him with eyes full of a future he had burned to the ground. He looked at the photo, then at the bus ticket. Slowly, he walked toward a nearby trash can. He hesitated, then dropped the photo inside. He kept the ticket. As the sun dipped below the skyline, Julian Thorne walked toward the subway, a man with a 5-year debt to pay, and for the first time in his life, a very long walk ahead of him. They say the best revenge is living well. But Elsa Vance proved that the best revenge is owning the very ground your enemies walk on. Julian Thorne spent his life valuing people by their net worth, only to find out that the most valuable thing he ever had was the woman he treated as an afterthought. He wanted a trophy to display, but he threw away a titan who could have saved him. Elsa didn't just win a court case, she won her freedom. And she taught the world a lesson that New York won't soon forget. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never assume the person standing in the background isn't the one holding the remote control. If you loved seeing justice served in high definition, make sure to hit that like button. It helps us bring more of these stories to life. Drop a comment below. Do you think Elsa was too kind to Julian in the end, or was the bus ticket the perfect final insult? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a reveal. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.